In this episode, we are going to explore what it really means to take the security controls that cloud providers give you and apply them in a consistent, disciplined way, whether you are operating in one cloud or across several. Many beginners assume that once they enable a few recommended settings in one environment, they are done, but the reality is that consistency across accounts, regions, and providers is where real security maturity begins. Built-in controls are powerful, but only if they are used deliberately and applied everywhere they are needed, rather than in isolated pockets. When organizations move from a single cloud setup to a multi-cloud strategy, complexity increases quickly and inconsistencies become easy to overlook. The core challenge is not understanding one provider's features. It is maintaining the same security intent across different platforms without losing visibility or discipline. Extending built-in controls consistently is about turning scattered protection into a coherent defense strategy. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Built-in controls include identity management systems, logging services, network segmentation features, encryption capabilities, and policy enforcement tools that come directly from the cloud provider. These are not optional add-ons. They are foundational services designed to help customers protect workloads without reinventing security from scratch. However, the presence of a control does not guarantee it is configured properly or applied universally. In a single cloud environment, it is already possible to have some accounts with strict policies and others with loose settings, simply because different teams made different choices. In a multi-cloud environment, this problem multiplies because each provider has its own terminology, interface, and subtle differences in behavior. The risk is not that the controls are weak, but that they are unevenly deployed. Inconsistency creates blind spots, and blind spots are exactly where attackers prefer to operate. To understand why consistency matters so much, imagine a company with 3 cloud environments where 2 enforce strong identity rules and 1 allows overly broad permissions. An attacker who gains access to any identity will naturally look for the weakest environment to escalate privileges or move laterally. If controls are uneven, the weakest link determines the overall risk posture. Security is rarely broken by defeating the strongest defenses. It is usually broken by finding the overlooked configuration that nobody realized was different. Extending built-in controls consistently means you reduce these uneven patches so that there is no obvious soft target. This is especially important for beginners to grasp because early cloud environments often grow organically, with teams experimenting independently. Without deliberate standardization, those experiments can turn into long-term exposures. Identity is again at the center of this discussion because it is the most portable and most dangerous asset in cloud environments. Each cloud provider has its own identity and access management system, but the principles behind them are similar. Authenticate strongly, assign least privilege, and separate duties. In a single cloud environment, extending built-in controls consistently means every account or project uses the same identity policies and avoids creating ad hoc administrator accounts. In a multi-cloud environment, it means aligning identity philosophy even if the implementation details differ. You may not configure 2 providers in exactly the same technical way, but you can require the same level of privilege control, the same use of strong authentication, and the same review processes for elevated access. When identity standards are harmonized, you avoid situations where one provider becomes the weak backdoor simply because its controls were treated casually. Logging is another area where inconsistency quietly undermines security. Each cloud provider offers logging for administrative activity, data access, and network events, but the categories and interfaces vary. If one environment logs detailed administrative changes and another logs only minimal events, investigations will be uneven and frustrating. Extending built-in logging controls consistently means deciding which types of events are mandatory across all environments and ensuring they are enabled everywhere. It also means protecting those logs with the same seriousness in every cloud, so that evidence cannot be tampered with in one place while being secure in another. Beginners often think logging is something you configure once and forget, but logging needs to be treated as a policy decision applied broadly. Consistency here ensures that if something suspicious happens in any environment, you can reconstruct what occurred without discovering that the needed log was never turned on. Network controls present another challenge because different providers use different names and structures for virtual networks, subnets, security rules, and gateways. Even though the terminology varies, the fundamental concepts remain similar: isolate resources, restrict inbound access, and limit unnecessary outbound communication. Extending built-in network controls consistently means defining clear segmentation standards and applying them in each cloud rather than improvising. For example, sensitive workloads should not be directly exposed to the internet in one provider while being properly segmented in another. If your security philosophy says private connectivity is preferred, that philosophy should carry over everywhere, even if the configuration screens look different. The important part is the intent behind the controls, not the exact label in the console. Consistent intent reduces confusion and helps security teams reason about architecture across environments. Encryption is another built-in capability that requires consistency rather than assumption. Most cloud providers support encryption for data at rest and in transit, but the settings may not always be identical by default. Extending encryption controls consistently means verifying that storage services, databases, and messaging systems follow the same encryption standards in every cloud. It also means ensuring that encryption keys are managed responsibly, with clear ownership and access restrictions. Beginners sometimes believe that because encryption is available, it is automatically enforced everywhere, but that is not always the case. A consistent encryption posture reduces the chance that sensitive data is protected strongly in one environment and weakly in another. This uniformity simplifies risk assessment because you do not need to remember exceptions for each provider. Policy enforcement tools provided by cloud platforms are especially powerful for achieving consistency. These tools allow you to define rules that govern what can be created, how it must be configured, and which actions are restricted. In a single cloud environment, using these tools systematically ensures that teams cannot accidentally deploy resources without required protections. In a multi-cloud environment, you may use different policy engines, but you can still align the policy goals. For example, you might require that all storage be encrypted, that public network exposure requires approval, and that certain high-risk actions be limited to specific roles. Even if the technical implementation differs, the policy intent should be mirrored. Beginners should understand that policy enforcement is how you scale security beyond manual review. It is how you translate principles into automated guardrails. One of the biggest mental shifts in multi-cloud environments is recognizing that consistency does not mean identical configuration screens. Instead, consistency means identical risk tolerance and identical protection standards. You may configure identity permissions differently in each provider because their models differ, but the end result should be equivalent levels of restriction and oversight. You may collect logs through different interfaces, but the retention period and integrity protections should align. You may design networks using different constructs, but segmentation goals should remain the same. This shift from technical sameness to security equivalence is important because it allows flexibility without sacrificing safety. Beginners sometimes get stuck trying to force one provider to look exactly like another, which is not always practical. The real objective is ensuring that no environment lags behind in protection. Operationally, extending built-in controls consistently requires visibility into all environments, because you cannot align what you cannot see. Security teams need an inventory of accounts, subscriptions, and projects across providers so they know where controls must apply. Without that inventory, new environments can appear quietly and operate without standard protections. This is sometimes called shadow cloud, where resources are created outside of established processes. Consistency depends on awareness, and awareness depends on centralized visibility. Even in a single cloud scenario, visibility matters because different business units may operate independently. Beginners should recognize that governance structures are part of security architecture, not just administrative overhead. Drift becomes even more significant in multi-cloud contexts because differences accumulate faster. A policy change in one provider may not automatically propagate to another, and over time the environments diverge. Extending built-in controls consistently means revisiting standards regularly and confirming that each environment still aligns with the agreed baseline. Drift detection mechanisms and periodic reviews help ensure that standards remain synchronized. Without this attention, the original alignment slowly erodes, and environments become inconsistent again. Beginners should see this as ongoing hygiene rather than emergency work. Just as a system needs patches, a multi-cloud strategy needs regular alignment checks. Another challenge is cultural rather than technical, because different teams may have preferences for different cloud providers. If each team treats its chosen provider as an isolated world, security standards can fragment. Extending built-in controls consistently requires shared understanding and shared expectations across teams. Security principles should be documented clearly enough that they transcend provider boundaries. This encourages collaboration rather than competition between cloud environments. When teams understand that they are all responsible for upholding the same security posture, consistency becomes a shared goal rather than a compliance burden. Beginners entering such environments should appreciate that communication is part of architecture. There is also a resilience benefit to consistent controls across clouds. If you must shift workloads from one provider to another due to outages or strategic changes, aligned security practices make transitions smoother. You do not have to redesign identity models, logging strategies, and network segmentation from scratch. Instead, you replicate the same principles in the new environment. This reduces the chance that urgent migrations create gaps. Consistency therefore supports not only security, but also operational agility. Beginners should view consistency as an enabler rather than a constraint. Extending built-in controls consistently across single cloud and multi-cloud environments is ultimately about discipline and clarity of intent. The controls are already there, provided by the platforms themselves, but their strength depends on how evenly and deliberately they are applied. Identity, logging, network controls, encryption, and policy enforcement must reflect the same standards everywhere, even if the implementation details differ. When environments are aligned, attackers have fewer weak spots to exploit and defenders have clearer visibility into what is normal and what is not. For new learners, the key takeaway is that security maturity grows from repetition and uniformity, not from isolated strong configurations. By committing to consistent extension of built-in controls, you transform multiple cloud environments from scattered territories into a coordinated defense landscape that behaves predictably and securely.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.